Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Xiaolin Perspectives, and today we're going to be discussing episode 47 of Xiaolin Showdown, The Dream Stalker. And yeah, as promised last week, this is the episode where Hannibal gets his revenge against the Xiaolin warriors and Raimundo. And how it begins is that we see the Xiaolin warriors as they're still at Master Monk Guan's temple, and all of them are just kind of resting. It's nighttime, they're all just minding their own business, when suddenly Master Monk Guan seems to react as the dots on his head light up, and he just immediately is alert, is on, and he senses that there's something amiss at his temple. As such, he orders Dojo to go and wake the other Xiaolin monks up, but they're already up. Well, mostly. Saint Raimundo is still sleeping, but they basically all reacted to the same evil wave that Master Monk Guan did, and so all of them are going to investigate, though they do have to go and wake Raimundo up. As such, all of them end up searching the temple grounds, but oddly enough, they find nothing. There's no hide nor hair of anything evil afoot. And so Raimundo, complaining that he was basically woken up for nothing, decides to just go back to hitting the hay, with Master Monk Guan conceding that if there is no threat, then maybe it is best that they all go to sleep. Unfortunately, though, they didn't look hard enough, as after everyone disperses, a mosquito flies in and goes into Guan's Shengongwu vault, and sure enough, it turns out the mosquito is Hannibal Roy Bean using the Moby Morpher. And, well, there are a couple of Shengongwu in the vault that he is particularly interested in, although he won't be seeing what those Wu are just yet. In the meantime, back with the Xiaolin warriors, of course they all go to bed, but in the middle of the night, Omi's own little lights light up as he seems to sense something, and in a sort of dreamwalker/dreary state, he ends up leaving his room and goes out into the temple grounds, and sure enough, there's something there waiting for him, and when he ends up walking right into it, it manages to stir him awake. And this thing that he walks into is basically what looks like a giant jellyfish monster with a mouth right in the middle of its face, a pair of eyes, and what looks like weird little tentacles or whatever. It looks more, or not really tentacles, but you know, those zappers that jellyfish have. I don't know. Point is, it's here, it's mean, and it wants to kill them. Also, it's big and blue. Point is, Omi reacts to it, and the other Xiaolin monks end up hearing the commotion and go out to help him fight the monster, Master Monk Guan included. Unfortunately, though, they're not really doing so well against it, as despite their best efforts, this thing is actually whooping their asses, and at one point almost manages to eat them. However, just before it does, however, the monster just vanishes, and a second after it does, Raimundo arrives on the scene with his Wudai weapon, only to find that, yeah, there's nothing there. As such, the Xiaolin monks quickly realize that clearly their earlier premonition was correct, and something did sneak onto the temple and unleash that thing on them. But that begs the question, who did it? As such, they immediately decide they need to go down their list of enemies, and of course, the name at the top of that list is Jack Spicer. As such, the Xiaolin monks take a ride on Dojo and go to Jack's house to see if he's responsible for this giant blue monster, only to find that his lab is wrecked. And when they end up finding one of his robots with a camera on it, they end up seeing footage of the initial attack. And sure enough, that same creature that attacked them also attacked Jack at the same time, with Jack only managing to have gotten away by going into a little panic cellar in his lab, which is where the Xiaolin monks find him. Of course, he initially assumes that the Xiaolin monks are the ones that unleashed it. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. But anyway, yeah, like I was saying, Jack initially assumes the Xiaolin monks are the ones that unleashed the monster, but they dash that story by letting him know they got attacked by the same thing. However, as the Xiaolin monks watch footage of the monster attacking Jack's robots, they discover that it has a unique ability, namely, that it has the power to breathe blue fire. And sure enough, when the Xiaolin monks go to see all the robots that were doused by said fire, they find that they've all been turned to sapphire. Now what do the Xiaolin monks know that seems to have the ability to do that? As such, the Xiaolin monks all end up going back to Master Monk Guan's temple, and sure enough, when they go and check the Shengongwu vault, they find that the Sapphire Dragon has disappeared. And it's not the only Wu that's missing, as they also discover that the Shadow of Fear is gone. As such, with these kind of minimalist clues, Master Monk Guan is able to put two and two together. Again, don't really know how, it's kind of a little bit of a leap in logic, and he soon figures out what's going on. That the reason why that monster attacked the group and then seemed to vanish just as Raimundo appeared? It's because Hannibal Roy Bean is using the Shadow of Fear to use Raimundo as an unwilling instrument. Basically, what's going on is that Hannibal is taking both of these Shen Gong Wu and using the Shadow of Fear's ability to enter Raimundo's mind and, exploit his fears. He was able to project the Sapphire Dragon out from Raimundo's mind. With the reason why it takes on its monstrous form is because it's supposed to now be a projection of his literal fears, and part of with also the assistance of the Moby Morpher, because that's what Hannibal did. Point is, the real Sapphire Dragon is currently in Raimundo's head, and every time he falls asleep, all Hannibal has to do is use the Shadow of Fear, and it begins projecting out into the real world and attacking the people that Hannibal wants it to attack, i.e. the Xiaolin monks and possibly anyone else that he sees as competition. As such, Raimundo quickly realizes that he's basically a walking time bomb, and ultimately, everyone thinks that maybe they need to keep Raimundo awake as long as possible. When it comes down to what Master Monk Guan realized, that they want to put these fears to bed, they need to figure out what fears exactly that Hannibal is exploiting. If Raimundo can come to terms with those fears, then it could potentially stop the Sapphire Dragon attacks. Unfortunately, though, that's easier said than done, as the Xiaolin monks keep doing everything they can to keep Raimundo awake, and I do mean everything. They throw water on him, they try and bring him in to do a dance game, even do a kind of hoedown, but all it does is just kind of prolonging the inevitable, and anytime Dojo tries to get Raimundo to open up, it just irritates him. However, all this is eventually put on hold as Dojo ends up sensing a new Shen Gong Wu. In this case, it's a Shen Gong Wu called the Shadow Slicer, I guess maybe medallion or a little mirror, I don't know. But point is, it has the ability to project a false image of whomever is holding the Shadow Slicer to act as a distraction for others. It's kind of a weak sauce in my opinion, but hey, it's probably boring but useful. Point is, the Xiaolin monks decide they have to go and deal with it, but in this case, those Xiaolin monks are Omi and Kimiko, as they're gonna leave Clay behind to make sure that Raimundo doesn't fall asleep. However, Kimiko seems to double back and says that the Shen Gong Wu that's revealed itself is Earth-based, a little weird, right? And says that they are going to need Clay. Yeah, it's a load of crap, as once Clay has gone off with a Longi Kai, it turns out Kimiko is in reality Hannibal. And I'll give credit where it's due. When we see this reveal, Kimiko's face ends up reverting into Hannibal's face, while the rest of the body is still Kimiko's. And Hannibal's face on Kimiko's body is the stuff of nightmares. Point is, Hannibal gets rid of anything that could potentially keep Raimundo awake, unless he dozes off. And so Hannibal once again uses the Shadow of Fear to fly into Raimundo's mind and, unleash the Sapphire Dragon. In the meantime, back with the Xiaolin monks, they end up finding where the Shadow Slicer is, which in this case is in a zoo, but upon getting to the zoo, they're intercepted by Jack Spicer, who it turns out is using the monkey staff to, turn the monkeys of the zoo against the Xiaolin warriors, as the Shadow Slicer is in the monkey habitat. As thankfully, Clay comes in and manages to kind of turn the tide by getting the Shadow Slicer away from the bad guys, but unfortunately, because he wasn't there to keep Raimundo awake, like I said, the Sapphire Dragon once again appears in its more monstrous form and begins attacking everybody, transforming monkey upon monkey into sapphire statues. All the Xiaolin monks are basically just going everywhere they can to make sure they don't get hit by this dragon. In the meantime, back with Raimundo, he seems to, I'm just gonna, for lack of a better term, say, awaken in his dream. And he's able to realize that he's just dreaming. As such, he decides to kind of take advantage of the situation and just wander more further into his mind. And I'll give credit where it's due. I like this sequence in the episode. It's a really trippy sequence as we see Raimundo just kind of delve into his mind, and we see just images flashing before his eyes of places he's been to, his friends, his fantasies. There's this weird there's this weird image that when he first appears, we see him in that fantasy arcade area that Wuya used initially to try and tempt Raimundo to join her back in the end of season 1. Or then likewise, we see Raimundo suddenly shift into wearing Jack Spicer's clothes and in his lab. And through all this, there's a weird shadowy presence that's following Raimundo, that's calling out to him, asking him what he's afraid of. Of course, Raimundo realizes that whatever this is his fear, and he initially confronts it, only for this thing to step out into the light, and it turns out the representation of Raimundo's fear is just a little kid version of himself. And upon Raimundo meeting his younger self, that's when Hannibal makes himself clear, and he kind of begins going Freddy Krueger on Raimundo's ass, as he just kind of starts appearing in random areas around the nightmare, and he just begins taunting Raimundo, just kind of echoing about him, just kind of talking about how he just feels so afraid, so weak, how he's always letting his fears get the best of him, and now they're going to destroy everyone he loves, and so on and so forth. In the meantime, and to even kind of add a bit of screw you to Raimundo, Hannibal uses the Shadow of Fear to basically create a direct link straight to the Sapphire Dragon, so that Raimundo can have a front row seat to it destroying his friends. Which, back with the Xiaolin monks, in the midst of all the chaos with the Sapphire Dragon, Omi ends up seeing the Shadow Slicer just lying around, and he makes a dive for it. But just as he does, one of the Sapphire Dragon's tentacles ends up touching the Shadow Slicer, and so Omi challenges the creature to a Xiaolin showdown. And what I like is that the instant Raimundo addresses the Sapphire Dragon as the Sapphire Dragon, it actually metamorphoses back into its true dragon form. As such, the challenge for this showdown is basically just a ring-out battle. What's going to happen is that Omi and the Sapphire Dragon are going to duke it out in an arena, and whoever gets forced out of the arena first will be considered the loser, with Omi wagering the Orb of Tornami and the Sapphire Dragon wagering itself. It's a Shengang Wu. I think it can do that. However, the Sapphire Dragon, to add an extra bit of flair to the mix, ends up using one of the monkeys that turns to Sapphire, and then it turns a rhino into Sapphire, and it calls for a grand cosmic clash Xiaolin showdown, which in turn allows Omi to also call in Kimiko and Clay to act as his backup. As such, parameters met and Omi accepts the challenge, the Xiaolin showdown is called. And what I kind of like is that basically what it does is that it takes the various environments from the zoo and then throws them into the sky in an arena, with each part of the arena holding one of the Xiaolin warriors facing off against the Sapphire Dragon or one of its Sapphire cohorts, with Omi, of course, facing the dragon head-on. It's actually pretty cool, though unfortunately we don't get to see a lot of it because, well, it's interspersed with Raimundo having his little tete-a-tete, or however it's pronounced, I'm sorry, I've only read it in books, with Hannibal as he continues trying to exploit Raimundo's fears. And it's here where we learn exactly which fears that Hannibal has been exploiting of Raimundo's. It's his fear of not measuring up, his fear of falling behind, his fear of not being good enough. And when that's kind of and how Hannibal even further exemplifies that is by once again rubbing in Raimundo's face that he was the last to be promoted to Xiaolin apprentice. However, as Raimundo starts realizing that that's the fear, it allows him to finally kind of come to terms with his younger self and realize that yeah, he is afraid of not being good enough, but that doesn't mean that he isn't. And as he manages to actually talk with the little kid version of himself, it allows him to come to terms with himself. This newfound burst of confidence allows Raimundo the power to actually fight back against Hannibal, and I'm guessing thanks to the power of the Shadow of Fear, it also ends up projecting Raimundo into the real world alongside the other Xiaolin monks in their showdown. And unfortunately, it could not come at a more opportune time, because the Xiaolin monks are unfortunately losing, as it looks like that Raimundo, or that Clay and Kimiko are not doing so well against their Sapphire opponents, while Omi unfortunately is outclassed by the Sapphire Dragon. And however, Raimundo continues just kind of turning the tide, and eventually he and his younger self do end up working together to face Hannibal, who, thanks to nightmare logic, has actually transformed himself to the monster from Goo Zombies, the final boss specifically. And so Raimundo is able to call on his full Wudai powers, and he just kind of whoops Hannibal's ass so hard that it sends him flying out of his brain. I can't do the scene justice. It's just a really damn good fight scene. But point is, since Hannibal was the one that was projecting the Sapphire Dragon with the Shadow of Fear, well, since he's now taken out of the equation, the Sapphire Dragon fades away. And so, by technicality, Omi and the other Xiaolin monks end up winning their showdown, resulting in everything getting back to normal and the Xiaolin warriors laying claim to the Shadow Slicer and, reclaiming the Sapphire Dragon, which they're confused by, as if they only got, glimpses of Raimundo in his fight with Hannibal, but thanks to, I'm guessing, the lingering effects of the Shadow of Fear, Raimundo is able to kind of pseudo-project to them and is thankful to help them out, but he says that he's got to get some sleep now, which the other Xiaolin monks are a little freaked freaked out by seeing Raimundo in the sky, but whatever. It's good, I guess. As such, the episode ends with the other Xiaolin monks return back to Master Monk Wan's temple, and all of them are just tired as they're trying to put the Shadow Slicer away and failing before Raimundo comes running down, just whistling a happy tune, having gotten a good night's sleep as he puts away the Sapphire Dragon and the Shadow of Fear. As such, he says that he is raring to go, that he's happy to keep up with his other teammates, and that after they do training, they gotta go out and find some evil. In the meantime, though, it's clear the other Xiaolin monks might need some rest, and well, that's where the episode ends, so there you go. But anyway, yeah, that was the Shadow Stalker. My thoughts on it. I think this is a pretty damn good episode, I'm not gonna lie. For one thing, let's just talk about some of the cool stuff in the midst of it all. I like the fact that the Sapphire Dragon came back. The Sapphire Dragon did work as a proper antagonist in its debut episode, but it was also one of those Shengang Wu that, for obvious reasons, does not really show up that often in the series, which, again, like I said, obvious why. But the thing is, I like that the way that it's used in this episode actually kind of plays on how the Sapphire Dragon is. As we saw in Night of the Sapphire Dragon, this thing is actively malicious. Its whole purpose is to transform people into Sapphire, and it does not give a shit who it does it to. But like I said, we already know that this thing loves what it does, it loves doing it, and it's not going to stop till it gets its way. So the idea of this thing now being actually unleashed in someone's subconscious and have its fuel source being the person's fear, I actually really like, as it basically gives the Sapphire Dragon an extra boost in power as we see it unleashed on the world in its new monstrous form. And I like it. It's actually pretty damn cool, and I can understand why the Sapphire Dragon would probably go along with this. Hannibal probably would fall under the same purview, but by that same token, Hannibal's helping this thing be unleashed full-blown, because after all, ever since the Night of the Sapphire Dragon episode, this thing has most likely just been sitting in a drawer in the Xiaolin Temple for God knows how long. So the idea of it now being fully unleashed and now having Raimundo actively being its power source, that's gotta be an extra bit of screw you to everybody. Just kind of imagine the Sapphire Dragon's point of view as it realizes it's fully free again, and all it has to do is just let this one guy sleep, and it can just go nuts on everybody else. I can kind of understand why the Sapphire Dragon would go along with a plan like that. And on top of that, the plan itself is honestly a really damn good one. Yeah, I call into question how Master Monk Guan was able to put the pieces together that quickly, because honestly, the clues that led him to figuring out that Hannibal was the one behind all this and that he was using the Sapphire Dragon and Shadow of Fear like that are minimal, to say the least. I could understand him potentially figuring out that maybe the Shadow of Fear and the monster are connected, and obviously Sapphire Dragon connection, because, well, monster breathes fire and it turns things to sapphire. But again, and him realizing, oh, it's actually Raimundo that's doing this, and Hannibal's the one responsible. Like, yeah, I'm gonna call some bullshit on that. How'd you figure that out so fast, Master Monk Guan? I don't even know how I would have figured that out. But regardless, the plan itself is honestly a really damn good one. And honestly, to give another comment to the episode, Hannibal actually works here. No joke, no sarcasm. I actually like how Hannibal is used in this episode. Yeah, his plan ultimately backfires, but the thing is, the plan itself is really damn cool, and it kind of plays on what Hannibal wanted at the end of the last episode. Him swearing vengeance against the Xiaolin monks, especially calling Raimundo out, since Raimundo was the one who humiliated him the most. And so to have the tool of the Xiaolin monks' destruction be fueled by Raimundo's own fear, I like that. It's pretty damn cool. And the Sapphire Dragon, as we've established in its debut episode, is a really powerful foe. The Xiaolin, let's just kind of talk about it. The Xiaolin monks only beat the Sapphire Dragon kind of by a fluke in its debut episode. It was only by Dojo realizing that the Sapphire Dragon was weak to soot that he was able to turn the tide. And even then, he needed an added boost just to be able to match the Sapphire Dragon blow for blow. So in that regard, unleashing the Sapphire Dragon in a brand new form, one that looks even more monstrous than its previous form, it does that. It gives it an extra sense of terror and grandiousness that does kind of allow it. I don't even think grandiousness is a word, but grandiosity. Point, whatever. I'm getting hung up on details. Point is, this extra added layer of power does give the Sapphire Dragon an extra boost, and and again, the fact that it's now being controlled by one of the Xiaolin old Xiaolin monks every time he falls asleep. That's got to be an extra bit of, oh shit. That does kind of add a sense of terror to everything, because when it comes down to it, everybody has to sleep at some point or another. You can't just have someone stay awake forever. And so the idea of having Raimundo just need to constantly stay awake, knowing that anytime he could fall asleep, this monster could be unleashed on his friends, it's a good one. And it does add a little bit of extra tension. And again, and what I love too is that Hannibal does go a little extra, does kind of go a little bit the extra mile to ensure that Raimundo does fall asleep, as he manages to trick the Xiaolin monks into leaving Raimundo unattended by utilizing the Moby Morpher, and again, like, the image of his face on Kimiko's body is just kind of creepy. Just seeing the eyes and his smile there, and the fact that you make it even better when Raimundo sees Kimiko with Hannibal's face, and he blinks, and then it just looks darker as it looks like the eyes got wider, the shadows underneath his eyes and mouth. It's like, ugh. It's like, God, that's just creepy. And to give credit where it's due, the nightmare sequence is so damn cool. I like that it kind of does exploit a lot of Raimundo's memories and, honestly, some of his insecurities that you can see here. I'll get to the character stuff with Raimundo in a minute, but kind of going off to how this nightmare is being played off of Raimundo's fears of not being good enough or not being as great as the other Xiaolin warriors. I like that some of the things we see here do kind of play off of some of Raimundo's own insecurities and fears. Like I said, the first thing we see in the nightmare when Raimundo first realizes that he's actually dreaming is that phantom image of everything that his heart desired, that Wuya used to tempt him to joining her side. And what makes it even better is that in the midst of all this, we briefly see this geisha there that's welcoming Raimundo to his chair, and then when Raimundo looks away for a second, the geisha looks like Wuya. And I kind of like that, because that was a moment in Raimundo's life where he had a lapse and did things that he regretted. And I'll get back to this when I talk about his weaknesses, or talk about Raimundo as a character in the episode, but that does kind of reflect a moment when Raimundo's fears got the better of him, and it wound up hurting everybody. Combine that with the fact that when Raimundo does actually talk to the child version of himself from his subconscious, he then suddenly looks like Jack Spicer and is yelling at his younger self, saying that he can't be him, that he's nothing, he's not even really, he's just a figment of his subconscious. Or there's a brief scene where Raimundo is suddenly on the beach with Tubby Moore in the background while the Xiaolin monks are making a sandcastle, which could potentially be a flashback to when Raimundo first faced Tubby Moore and got his ass whooped, not helped by the fact that Dream Jack Spicer is apparently being crushed by Tubby Moore, so what have you. On top of that, there's also that scene, when suddenly Raimundo is in a theater and we see an image of him flying with the Sword of the Storms, which could very easily be him overcoming it, but still could be playing to the fears, since in order to get to that victory in the first place, he had to suffer a major failure and then studied hard just to get there. It's actually really damn good. I like that. It's trippy, and how Hannibal utilizes it is really damn creative. Honestly, I just recommend looking up the nightmare sequence if you can find it. It's not like the most scary thing that I've seen, but it definitely is trippy and definitely makes you feel uncomfortable in all the best ways possible, especially with how Hannibal just seems to appear everywhere. And to give more kudos to Hannibal as a villain in this episode, his usual southern drawl that reeks of a southern gentleman and all that nice stuff that goes with it really works when he's throwing all of Raimundo's insecurities in his face, as it feels so disingenuous and cruel, as like he's just laughing at Raimundo, finding amusement in his suffering, and I love that. It's really damn good. And now, to actually getting to Raimundo himself, I like that the episode does kind of get more into his character, and I like that what we see here is that the fear that was being exploited was Raimundo's fear of not being good enough, which I'm okay with. I genuinely do like that. Like I said, one of the things that I had a problem with in the initial episode with the Shadow of Fear was how that episode when it utilized the Xiaolin monk's own individual fears was just kind of surface level stuff. Things that would just kind of creep you out in the bedroom and give you a hard time falling asleep. Which I understand. Maybe don't get too complex, and I'm not saying anything to knock that episode, because as I do remember liking that episode, and there was a moral there with learning to overcome your fears and accepting that you are afraid, even of something as silly as, well, a squirrel. But the thing is, what I like about this episode is that it really does open a window into Raimundo's character when you learn that his fear is of not being good enough. Because, quite frankly, that does line up with a lot of Raimundo's attitude. I've mentioned before that Raimundo is kind of a slacker, that he can be overconfident in himself, and that he does kind of boast about his abilities in a high regard, and then gets a negative attitude when things don't go in his favor. But the thing is, knowing in advance that Raimundo is insecure about his placement among the Xiaolin monks and is constantly afraid that he isn't up to the snuff when it comes to matching them in skill, a lot of his attitude makes sense. A lot of his overconfidence and bravado could just be him masking, trying to hide the fact that he is so insecure about his place among the Xiaolin monks. And as such, he basically just adopts a fake it till you make it mentality. That if he can just keep pushing this whole identity out there in the world, then maybe eventually he could reach that. And I like that. I do actually like that, and it kind of allows a lot of his attitudes throughout the series to actually explains a lot of his failures. To kind of going back to season 1, going back to how Raimundo got his ass whooped by Tubby Mora in that episode, that hit Raimundo hard, because in a way it did seem to confirm to Raimundo what he was already afraid of, that he wasn't good enough, and ultimately he overcame that by basically finding a way to overcome his weaknesses and ultimately beat Tubby Mora when they next face each other again. But I do kind of like. But it does work with that, and it actually makes Raimundo's turn to the dark side at the end of season 1 make that much more sense, because the thing is, knowing that Raimundo is actively afraid of not being good enough or not matching the other Xiaolin monks in terms of skill, it kind of explains a lot of his out-of-character behavior in both the Mala Mala Zhang episode and the In the Flesh episode when he eventually turned. Because in both of those episodes, he was just trying to prove himself. He was trying to prove himself, not to the other Xiaolin monks, not to Master Feng, but possibly to himself. He was presented with, as we saw in Mala Mala Zhang, he was presented with a foe that he was actively told, this guy is out of your league, you can't fight him. And Raimundo, already feeling insecure about who he is, probably looked at that and thought, no, I am good enough, I am strong, and I'll prove it, and I'll prove that I am. And then that's when he went to go face Mala Mala Zhang, and, well, the rest. But then, as a consequence of that, the other Xiaolin monks were promoted to Xiaolin Apprentice, but not him. And suddenly Raimundo not only feels that he's underappreciated at the Xiaolin Temple, but that his fears might have been right. Because after all, if he was truly good enough, why did the other Xiaolin monks get promoted over him? And I like that. And I like that. And it could further explain why he left the temple. It wasn't just the fact that he was angry that people were lording the fact that they were higher rank over him. It was the fact that he genuinely felt that he probably didn't belong, that he didn't want to be there. The fact that everyone was trying to be all nice and friendly to him still probably felt like pouring salt on the wound to him. And that's probably what further pushed him to go into the dark side, because it wasn't just the fact that he felt unappreciated at the Xiaolin Temple, but the fact that he is not good enough, and thus kind of with his fears just kind of crawling around in his head, pushing all of his insecurities into the limelight. It makes sense why in the midst of all that he would turn to Wuya, because Wuya feeds into what he wants to hear. That he is good enough, that he is stronger, and that in turn is what allows, and that in turn, it basically acted as kind of like a band. It kind of acts like this. You know how someone feeling depressed thinks that the best way they can get out of that depression is to just stuff snack food down their gullet? It was kind of like that. Raimundo felt a bit of dependency on Wuya because she did feed into what he want because she fed into his insecurities and made him genuinely believe that he was good enough on his own, and thus that's what made him want to side with her because she actively made him feel appreciated and stronger. Now, by the end of the episode, of course, Raimundo quickly realized that, hey, those people, the Xiaolin monks are my friends, and I do want them by my side, and that's what turned allowed him to go together. And you could argue that him not wanting to be accepted as a not wanting to be promoted right away to a Xiaolin apprentice when he did rejoin the good guys was him somewhat overcoming that fear. But the thing is, later episodes do confirm that those fears are still in there. And even if you come to better terms with them, they can still be lingering in there. And we see that in the Panda Town episode, and when Raimundo is finally advanced to the rank of Xiaolin apprentice. As throughout the episode, despite the fact that he still is trying to be his usual self, trying to be confident, trying to actually take control of the situation, well, he's being talked down to. He's being exploited. He's being made fun of, so to speak, and treated as lesser by his friends. And honestly, I can understand why after an incident like that, why Raimundo would probably want to try and prove himself better. It's just that this time around, he has wisdom by experience on his side, and allows him to realize that he can't let let me put it this way. The difference between the Panda Town episode and stuff like the In the Flesh episode is that In the Flesh was Raimundo's fears taking control of him, whereas in Panda Town, those fears basically acted as Raimundo's fuel source to prove to the other Xiaolin monks, no, that I am good enough, which I like that. And with all that and with the recontextualization of that with this episode, the Dream Stalker, I think it actually does open a new angle to look at Raimundo's character. And it does kind of make me wonder just kind of what goes on in Raimundo's head that he doesn't really want to talk about. Because considering just how overconfident and cocky Raimundo is on a regular basis, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some nights Raimundo falls asleep every night having to tell himself, yeah, I am good enough. I'm here. I deserve to be here. And yet, at the same time, still having that little voice in his head that tells him, no, you're not. And I like that. I mean, okay, I don't like obviously a voice like that is hell, and I speak from personal experience, and I feel like a lot of people could actually relate to that fear, as there's a lot of people who would feel that kind of imposter syndrome, believing that they're genuinely not good enough despite all they've accomplished. So kind of seeing that reflected with Raimundo, who is actually pretty nice, and by the end, I do like that Raimundo does come to terms with those fears, and by the end, it does make him feel more confident. It does make him realize that he does belong with the Xiaolin monks, and that ultimately he is a good enough warrior, which he proves when he whoops Hannibal Roy Bean's ass. And I like that. It's a really good, like I said, it's a really good character journey for Raimundo, and does offer a brand new side to his character that you probably wouldn't consider before, but it makes a total sense when you actually think about it. It works in context with everything we've seen before. It actually recontextualizes a lot of things about Raimundo that we've seen before, and ultimately by the end, it does give Raimundo some really good character development by virtue of him managing to overcome these insecurities and realize, yeah, I am strong enough and I am ready to stand by and defend my friends no matter the consequences. I like that. It's really cool. So, yeah, when it comes down to it, The Dream Stalker is a really damn good episode. It's got a really good character stuff with Raimundo. Hannibal actually does work as a villain for this episode, and a lot of the stuff that makes him goofy actually kind of comes around and acts and becomes legitimately threatening, especially what in the nightmare scenario this episode does. It's cool seeing the Sapphire Dragon again and seeing how it's utilized by Hannibal is honestly really damn cool. I liked seeing the progression. I liked the tension. The showdown is actually really nice, and kind of going off of that, the final confrontation between Raimundo and Hannibal, really damn good. And overall, I think this episode is... Hold on. Sorry about that, dry throat. Point is, it's a really damn good episode, and quite frankly, I think it's probably one of my favorites in the series, if not my favorite episode of the series. So, on the whole, yeah, I think that the Dream Stalker is really damn good, and is really damn good, and I'm kind of glad that I was able to finally see it, so... yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. I thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in next week when we get to an episode that, from what I can tell, is probably a kind of goofy one. So till then, I hope you have a good Friday, and take care.